Hey, this is Darren, head of remote at GitLab, and today I'm joined by Jack at Lattice. So I'm going to toss it over to him. He's going to give you some context on the situation that he and his team are facing right now. I think it's going to be relevant to a lot of other companies out there that are being thrust into remote. And then we're just going to have a conversation about all things remote, building culture, implementing the right processes, and so forth. So Jack, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. So I'm Jack Altman. I'm the CEO at a company called Lattice. We're about 150 people. We're mostly based in San Francisco, but we have employees other places. Sort of amid the recent news and the outbreak of coronavirus, we have gone to a work from home situation for at least the time being. And so I reached out to Darren because GitLab is a remote first company that we've looked up to for a long time, and they've made it very successful with a large number of people. And so kind of just reaching out to see what we can learn. And Darren agreed to chat with me. And then we decided, hey, we'll record this so that we don't have to take notes, and also so that we can share with other people so they can watch. So Darren, if it's cool, I might just start asking you a bunch of questions and we can just chat over this. I'm sure a lot of other companies are in a similar sort of zone as Lattice right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it. And the more folks we can help, the better.
I think the first thing to acknowledge is that you are a remote company. Lattice and most of the rest of us who are going into a remote situation are not remote companies. This is new for us. Before we started recording, you and I were joking that, you know, for us right now, it feels like we're doing a lot and we're making a lot of changes. For you, it's business as usual. And the other difference is that we're not sort of doing this forever. The plan is not to become a remote only company. I do hope we learn something from it. I think we will, but that's not the plan. So can you talk a little bit about sort of that difference and what it's like to be a fully remote company versus how you imagine it is for companies like us or others maybe watching this, making this short-term transition?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to just kind of keep calm and go remote, and keep calm being the key ingredient here. So what's happening is companies at large are being thrust into this crisis-driven work from home scenario where they weren't able to plan for it, they weren't even able to think about it. All of a sudden, people just have to work from home, and you sort of find out in real time what communication gaps there are. You find out in real time who has home workspaces that are ideal for this and who does not. You sort of uncover all the things that you could make work in a co-located space that now that you don't have everyone in that same space, you start seeing some cracks in the pavement. I honestly think though that for your company and for others in the same situation, you can choose to do one of two things. You can either let it derail you for as long as you have to work from home, or you can seize the opportunity and implement some remote first practices that will benefit you even after you go back to the office. So to your point, there will be some companies that are going through this, and at the end of it, when it kind of gets back to life as normal, some people may choose to not go back to the office. They found that they're more productive, or they're able to spend more time with their friends or family or community, to just build a more meaningful life around it. It just gives them new energy for work because they're able to work outside of the office. Everyone is going to respond to this differently. It's very individualistic. Remote is not great for everyone, just like a fully in-office situation is not great for everyone. So the first thing is, like, don't expect a blanket solution. Don't expect blanket reactions. But I would encourage you to seize the opportunity. It's like you're in the situation. And so what I'm encouraging companies to do is embrace the reality that you're already a remote company. And what I mean by that is, if you have even one person working outside of the office on a semi-regular basis, or if you have two offices, or if you are one company with people on two floors, even the people on two floors for a good chunk of the day are remote to each other. You have two offices, you're definitely remote to each other. And so, especially for smaller companies that intend to scale and get bigger, those kind of remote to remote situations they're only going to stress you more as you scale if you don't solve it now. And so what I recommend is putting in place remote first practices now that will help you get through this coronavirus situation where everyone is thrust into work from home. But then even if you go back to the office, having that infrastructure in place is going to create efficiencies. So let me give you one example, and then you can dive in with other questions. I know I've had the floor for a while. Documentation and working handbook first is something that's core to why GitLab works. So we have 1,200 people, no offices anywhere across 65 countries. We're completely asynchronous. We have almost every time zone covered. Even the executives don't go into an office. We're 100% remote. The only way that works well is we have a company handbook, and it's public to the world. There is no internal handbook. If you Google GitLab handbook, you'll find it. If you printed it, it would be 3,000 pages, all of our processes, all of the guides on how we do async meetings, hiring, compensation, everything. That is our single source of truth. And if you have people that are working remotely and people that are working in the office, if you don't have a single source of truth for them both to reference, you start to get fractures in the communications. You start to get silos of a certain team is operating this way, and then another team is operating slightly differently because there was a change made from one team, but it wasn't cascaded over to the other team. Like, what do we use? Do we use Slack? Do we use email? Some people prefer one or the other. Someone needs to decide that this is the single source of truth. This is the communication medium, that no matter where you are in the world, this is what we're going to use. And baking that mentality into the culture, I think, is the most fundamental thing to remove the chaos from everyone's working from home now. Because as long as everyone knows where to go to, even if that single source of truth starts as a list of names of who can help with what kind of problem, it could be as simple as that. Like, documentation can start as simple as, these are the DRIs for however many problems you may come up against in this type of situation. And then you start fleshing it out. Like, documentation is iterative. It can start as just an FAQ on who handles what, like who puts out what fires. And then as additional fires are put out, you document how you did it, and the handbook grows. GitLab's 3,000 page handbook did not begin as 3,000 pages. It became 3,000 pages. So hopefully that's useful. I know that's a lot, and like, ask away with follow-ups that kind of dive more specifically into what you're after.
Yeah, no, I think documentation is one really important thing. I think as a company grows in general, documentation, like the art of reading and writing, becomes increasingly important.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Setting, I think that it also is true. So I think for probably for all companies, writing more than feels natural is a good thing, and documenting more than feels natural is also quite important for employee onboarding and other things like that. It's obviously in a short-term case like we're in, or like many companies are in, we're not gonna make a handbook that's aimed at being remote. But to your point, just starting to document more and to be clear and to build a single source of truth probably is good for all companies. It's probably the right way to think about things. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, we like to say that all remote forces us to do things that all companies should be doing. We just have to do it much more quickly and much more intentionally, because you can't use like physically tapping someone on a shoulder or calling a quick meeting in a boardroom to get up to speed. When you don't have that as a fallback, it forces you to hone in on it. And yeah, to your point, it's like, if you're planning on going back to the office, don't devise like a remote playbook. Devise a company playbook. Like, ignore the whole remote thing. Just build something that you would want a future hire to come in and already have a good grasp on whatever it is that it's meaningful to your company. Again, wherever this employee is located, office 1, office 2, remote, whatever. It's simply good practice, and this moment in time is kind of a forcing function to actually put some parameters around that.
Yeah. Can we talk resources for a second? Like, what are the blog posts, the guides, the sort of best practices, maybe even what are the like training resources? Like, maybe there's in-person or I suppose not in person, but I mean live training that can be done. What do you recommend? Like, what's the way for a company that is going to go remote for, let's say, 1 month to get up to speed quickly?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as part of my role at GitLab, I am responsible for the all remote section of our handbook. And I have built that up to almost 30 guides now, and it covers every element of how we do remote. So if you Google GitLab's guide to all remote, you'll land on that homepage, and then you'll see a bunch of links, meetings, async, so on and so forth. each one of those guides goes really in depth on how we do it end to end to try to give outsiders that aren't naturally steeped in remote a really comprehensive look at like into the mind of how it works for us. And it's all open source with the goal being, I would love if somebody just copy and paste it and starts running their meetings and running their async workflows just like we do. And then if they find improvements, because it's on GitLab, they can actually make a merge request and add a contribution back to make that page better. So it has started with my experience, but we want other companies to feed back into that. I think it's very comprehensive. If anything, the issue is going to be, it's a lot. This is something that is ideally looked over through the course of weeks or months and built up versus, oh, we have everyone working from home now. How do we do this right now? So if that's the case, look at the guides. What is the most pressing? Are meetings the thing that's throwing everything into chaos? All right, look at our guide to meetings and figure out what you need to do there. Does everybody seem to have kind of frictions in their workspace? I have a getting started guide that you can send to each employee. And it's like, okay, here is a starter kit on what to do, what to focus on, what guardrails to set up with friends and family now that you're working from home, all of the kind of basics to get that done quickly. Twist and Doist have some really good guides as well. Basecamp has open sourced their handbook. They have a really good guide on communication. And I'm working with a few friends at Holloway, Holloway. They are an amazing editorial resource, and they are currently working on a complete end-to-end guide book on remote working. And so I personally have contributed a lot to that manual. And I think they're probably still a few weeks out from releasing the entire thing, but they have released snippets of it that are fully edited and fully done given the need for this. So I would say start there. And, you know, if you need an accelerated path, you just want somebody to kind of come in, take inventory of your company. There are some remote work consultants out there. I can leave some recommendations in the show notes. A few names come to mind. They're quite busy right now.
Yeah, no,
but in some ways that's like kind of what I'm doing with you, but it would be awesome to take it a step further and like fully get immersed in your actual organization, because you know, you'll have a certain level of maturity on what tools and technologies you use and a certain level of scale and size that's going to be different than any other company. So you would approach it slightly differently depending on those variables.
Yeah, no, I think those are great. Yeah, I poked around the GitLab resources. They're very good. Some of those other ones that you mentioned, I also read over. I saw Slack put some good stuff out.
Yeah.
So,
and I think one interesting thing about that, I'll say quickly, is the reason why there's not a one size fits all. Like, what is the ultimate guide to just doing crisis remote well? The issue is that the answer is different for every company. A 10-person company is very different than a 1,000-person company. It's very different than a 500-person company. A company that already has some people working remotely, they've started paving the way, very different than if you're purely in office and now everyone is remote. So it's different for everyone. I think the one piece of advice that, the one piece of advice I generally give companies that want to transition to remote, like crisis aside, is I say get all of the executives out of the office for a meaningful amount of time. At least a month, ideally a quarter. None of them can be in the office. And then have a chief of staff or an EA or maybe one or two serve purely as a documentarian on what breaks, what becomes less efficient, what gaps you wish were filled. And then you start a prioritization list of like, these are the things that have become apparent immediately, with information going to the top and then information cascading back down. And then you simply put that, you almost crowdsource it amongst the company. Like, these are the issues we found in trying to go remote. Is anyone an expert on this, or know someone who's an expert on this? And you just sort of take this iterative approach instead of trying to put it on one person to figure all of this out. Because it's more complicated than that. Going remote is something that impacts the fabric of every single person at the company. And it's unique in that way. It's not like specific to finance or specific to engineering. This impacts the fabric of how the entire company functions. So it makes sense to kind of empower everyone to speak up and say, hey, I've got an approach for this or a tool for this. Like, let's try this. There's going to be a lot of experimentation with tools. Yak is a good example. It's a Slack plugin that allows you to take like quick video snippets. Co-screen is another example where it allows two screens to collaborate at the same time. Really good for designers. If you've just been able to walk over to your co-designer's desk and see things on the screen together, this is a virtual way of doing that. So there'll be some experimentation with tools. I think it's kind of a golden era for remote tools. And I feel like a lot of teams will fall so much in love with them during this period that they'll still use them in the office. Again, if they're on different floors, I mean, even at Google, you have people across buildings that will do hangouts with each other because
Definitely.
they don't want to go across the Googleplex.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking to Heather Doche, who's the VP of People at Webflow, which is also a great remote company. She was talking about, I asked her, one of my questions that I asked her was, what's the remote stack? She had a good list, but she also recommended that in a period of transition like this, when you're doing remote for a short period of time, use the tools available. Don't try to add, keep it simple. Don't add complexity. Stay with Slack. I thought that was very good tactical advice, and I think that's right.
I do agree with that as well. I was chatting with the CEO of HackerOne, and he asked me to kind of do like a guest edit of a post that he's going to be putting out on this. And one of the sections he had in there was like, use any and all tools available. It was like, it's free reign, like whatever tool works best for your team, use it. And I saw that and I was like, wow, we should have a chat on this because I think I have a counterpoint. Because at GitLab, we use pretty much 4 things: Google Docs, Slack, Zoom, and GitLab the product. So within GitLab is where all of our work happens. We have GitLab issues and GitLab merge requests. And there are some specialties, like on the marketing operations team, a subset uses Marketo, and we use Expensify for expenses. But on the whole, like company-wide, we've boiled it down to 4 things. So I would actually encourage teams to start first from a perspective of how few tools can we use to make this work?
Yeah.
Because that forces you to not have communication silos going.
Absolutely.
With communication being scattered. And one note I'll make on Slack, a lot of companies will jump right into Slack and try to do like entire projects on Slack, which it is possible to do that. But one of the forcing functions that I recommend in going remote first is GitLab does not actually pay for the tier of Slack that keeps messages forever. We intentionally expire them after 90 days. And the reason we do this is so that all work will happen in the eventual single source of truth, which is GitLab. So that's going to be different for every company, but think through, where does work end up? That's where you want it to start. And by forcing Slack messages to expire after 90 days, it encourages and incentivizes people to not work in Slack. So for us, Slack is almost entirely just for informal communication. So it's where people go to talk about, we have like an In the Parenthood channel where all the parents can get together and we can just discuss things like, look, my 7-year-old won't get dressed in the morning and go to school. Does anybody have a crazy 7-year-old that can give me some tips? And so that's what we use Slack for, is to build relationships and interpersonal relationships, because we don't see each other in person. And it works a lot better to just do the work, start the work where it needs to end up, instead of trying to run a project through Slack only to have to port it over at some point.
Right.
So thinking through that could save you some headaches. Like, what can we afford to not use? Like, how focused can we get this?
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I think that's way better. Can we talk about personal management a little bit? Like, how does one manage themselves in a remote context? And I think maybe gearing this, because the idea here is for in-office workers transitioning to remote for a short period of time. What are some of the key ways that we can make this transition effectively? And just like a few things to note. One is, a lot of us who are in this transition are used to socializing during the day. We're used to seeing people face to face. We're used to like having time when we swing by the coffee station in the middle of the office and have a quick chat, or you walk by someone's desk and you do I often hear this, and I think it's very true, that remote teams talk about, well, you can't do that, walk by and tap them on the shoulder, and so you have to now systematize that so that everybody can feel that. But there's some human connection in that tap on the shoulder and the quick chat. So
Yeah.
there's the social element. There's the sort of distraction of the home environment and that difference. Um, there's a little bit of a difference in sort of the way you communicate and the kind of the bandwidth of that interaction, and it makes meetings a little bit different. So how do I as an individual do my best work, stay sane if this is new for me, feel productive, feel like a regular human still? How do I do that in a world where I'm, now working from home unexpectedly?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that question is it's less of an issue if this is the start of something you intend to see through. So everything you just mentioned, like getting your family to understand that although you're home, you're working, is extremely difficult the first week, even the first month. It's like they just don't get it. It's like, oh, he's here, therefore he's available. And it's like, no, not at all. I even recommend people, if they're able to close off their space, use a busy or available indicator. So there's some like USB systems that you can put like an external light outside your door, and then just like trigger it from the office. Like red light means I'm recording, don't come in. Green light means, yeah, you can come in.
Tiny,
Those kinds of things.
tiny
But if,
tactical question there. When
yeah,
when you have a 10 or 15-minute break,
yeah.
do you recommend staying in the work zone or going, stretching, seeing a family member?
Yeah, it's different for everyone, but if it's 10 or 15 minutes for me, I'm way better suited to leave, go see family, take a break, like a quick lap around the yard, something get out, because I can't do meaningful deep work in 10 or 15 minutes. So what ends up happening is if I try to do deep work, I just get frustrated. And then I'm on top of my next meeting and I'm starting that meeting from a bad place. Whereas if I'm just honest with myself, like, look, nothing's happening in 10 minutes. I'm going to go out, get some fresh air, like get my heart rate up, say hey to the wife, walk the dog for a second, like stretch my arms, do something, and then come back and get refreshed. Like let's go. And so you got to take some self-awareness and just be honest with yourself of, okay, I can Pomodoro technique, 20 minutes, I'm going to crank through something. Great. But if it's 10, it's like, I'm going to get halfway through this and then super frustrated. And I'm just going to think about it for the whole next meeting. Like, don't do that. But again, this is easy when you have a chance to ease into remote. You'll
Right.
figure that out in the first week. But like,
Totally.
what if you're only working remotely for a week?
Right. Yeah.
It's like the kind of thing where you fly to Europe, you're all out of whack with the time zone. And then the day you fly back, you're like, I'm great. I'm in the perfect time zone. The acclimation thing takes a minute. So I'd say, like, give yourself some grace. If you're only going to be in a work from home situation for a couple of weeks, you're probably not going to have it perfectly dialed in, but you'll learn a lot about yourself that if you end up working more remotely, after that, you'll have some lessons learned.
Yeah.
What were some of you repeat the beginning of that question again? I feel like I had a bit of tactical advice, but we got off on a tangent there.
Sort of what are some other tips or tricks or ways to have a productive work from home day? Like, for example, I heard a good piece of advice that was, don't just roll out of bed and immediately start working. Like, take a shower, get dressed, walk around the block, like make work time start, make work time end. I thought that sounded like good advice.
Yeah, that is
I
good advice. I
Yeah.
do like that. It's interesting because I've heard a lot of people say get a routine for work from home, and I do think if it's very temporary, to the point where you're going to try to keep people synced relatively close to the time zone, like you generally want people still around synchronously.
Mhm.
In that case, it's probably best to kind of create your own routine that mimics a going to work routine, because you're going to be fixed to those hours. Now, if you ever get to the point where you're like, well, let's tear down the working hours, we're going to work asynchronous. My recommendation there is throw routine to the wind. Like, the only reason people have routine right now is because they've been forced into it by the construct of time.
Yeah.
For me, I actually thrive on not having a routine. Like, every day could be totally different. Like, sometimes my working hours start and end by like 6-hour swings, depending on the weather outside. Now, if you talk to somebody that's in like Tahoe or Whitefish, Montana, you'll get it, because they're like, look, if there's fresh powder on the mountain, I ain't working until 3 o'clock. But then I'm going to start working at 3 o'clock and like go to midnight because I accomplished what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And now I'm okay working. So that's kind of the ultimate utopia if you can get fully async where you can throw routine to the wind and the only routine is that you don't have a routine. But again, that takes an incredible amount of discipline, determination, and trust across the organization and some pretty solid infrastructure on asynchronous work so that people can work apart from you for 6 or 8 hours and then trust that you can come back in, see that in context, and then move that project forward. Probably not going to happen in 2 weeks, but it's something like now's the time to lay that groundwork if ever you were going to do it. In terms of just making sure you have a productive day, I do advise having just a heart to heart with family. It's like, I'm here, but please don't come in unless it would be as urgent as you would get in your car or hop on the subway, go to the office and come in there. Like that should be the same threshold. Like, is it important enough that you would physically go to the office, knock on the door, and be like, "Hey, that's the same threshold at home." And you
Right.
just kind of have that honest conversation because it is by default that is just like crazy. It sounds
Right.
crazy. It's like you're right there. But it's like no, but I'm in work.
Right.
So the threshold for interruption should be the same as if I were at a physical office
Love
space.
that. Yeah, it's really good.
And the one thing I'd say on having a productive work from home day, one thing I've noticed is some people try to force themselves into the routine that matches work. But because they can see outside, there's this like constant nagging all day of like, am I doing this right? And if that's you, I would say, look, maybe restructure your morning where you've got daylight hours, like everyone else is on the road, so no one's out walking. Like, go take a walk, go take a hike, like start your day with a hike and then shift your hours and work like a little bit later because it's going to be dark. Like, you can't go outside when it's dark anyway. Maybe you're more comfortable working when it's dark outside and it doesn't kind of like eat at you that you're stuck in your house when you could be out there. So I
Yep.
would say experiment with that a little bit. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of people get stuck on, I just don't feel like I'm really productive. But what they need to unlock is it's because you're being called to go do something else right now. It's like incongruent. Like, why am I here with this amazing opportunity and I'm not taking advantage of it?
Yeah.
Try it out. Try it out and see. It doesn't really work during the coronavirus situation, but something that is sort of a parallel in GitLab is that not everybody at GitLab works from home.
Mm.
So we don't say you have to work from home. We just say there's no office to commute to, and we will reimburse co-working or external office expenses because not everyone's home is amenable for
Yep.
work.
Absolutely.
About 20% of the company takes us up on that and actually submits an expense report on any given month. They just prefer to go to a coffee shop. They prefer to go to a co-working space somewhere outside of their home. So if you're doing this in a place where that's not, that's not going to impact your health, offer that as well. Like, it's not always the ideal situation to work from home.
Yeah, this has been great. Any final thoughts or pieces of advice for these transitionary companies like us who are doing this for a period of time that we didn't cover?
I would say, look, to whatever degree you can, laugh about it. I mean, it's like it's too easy to get too wrapped up in how serious it is. It's like, oh my God, we're all working from home. Like, why are all these things broken? It's like, we're fundamentally working differently. It's
Yeah.
not like remote is just the absence of an office. It's a fundamentally different way to work. I mean, like, I'd say position it like this. If you have a company based in Seattle and you're opening a Singapore office, you expect a few things to go wrong on day one of the office opening. Like the key fobs don't work, the elevators are stuck, lunch comes late, it's cold, whatever. You just kind of roll with it. You understand that a new office gets more polished over time. People talk it out, they talk about their issues, they work together to fix them. Even the office environment evolves over time. So think about this new remote thing as a new office. Like, we just suddenly opened a new remote office. Like, what are the things we anticipate to go wrong? What processes do we put in place to kind of iterate and roll with it? That helps frame it up a little bit differently because it is fundamentally different. It's a new place. You got new tenants called your family. You got new distractions called the great outdoors. It's different, and you got to learn to give yourself some grace on learning to deal with it. And as a leader, be careful not to expect every one of your team members to react the same way.
Mm.
Remote is super awesome for some people. It is extremely difficult for others. And that doesn't say anything about who they are as a person or their capabilities at work. You've thrust them into a new office. It would be just the same as if you've ripped somebody from Seattle and put them in Singapore and expected everything to work the same. It's not. Just be open and honest about it. Communicate, over communicate, and just be vulnerable. Like your whole team is figuring it out together. Try to laugh through it and do the best you can. I think you'll come out more efficient on the other side.
That's great advice. Well, this has been awesome. Darren, thanks a ton for doing this. This is really valuable. And I really appreciate you making time for it.
Absolutely, man. Godspeed and good luck. Let us know how we can help.
Thank you.